If we don't pick up a first down, you walk to the sideline and you either get chewed out or potentially even worse, they don't even want to talk to you.
Yeah.
No eye contact. So all of a sudden you start to subconsciously develop this purely behaviorist version, like this place that was so powerful and meaningful seems like it might only be interested in what I can do for it or them or what have you. So you develop this faulty feedback loop
Yeah.
that this value that I was just feeling is dependent on how I play. And then if I don't play well, the questions start to come back up.
Welcome to the Captains and Coaches podcast, where we explore the art and the science of leadership through the lens of athletics and beyond. I'm your host, Tex Wilkin, and today we travel to New Orleans for the NSCA Coaches Conference to sit down with Jim Davis, founder of the Good Athlete Project and a pioneering force in the social emotional learning within athletics through his Beyond Strength journal. From building one of the largest high school strength programs in the country to developing character-driven leaders worldwide, Jim's approach transcends traditional coaching paradigms. In this powerful conversation, we dive deep into how coaches can shape not just good athletes, but more self-aware, resilient human beings. Whether you're a coach or a team leader seeking to create lasting impact, this episode will challenge you to think differently about behavior, purpose, and the true meaning of athlete development. With that, let's hand it off to Jim. Ready, and break.
We're thrilled to be here.
We are thrilled to be here. We are grateful to be here as well.
Very grateful to be here.
And I'm here with Jim Davis
How are you, Tex?
at an undisclosed location.
True. We got
Very
to keep
true.
this. We can't say anything about it.
We
Or our
cannot.
guy, who will not be named, will have our facts for it.
We are at the NSCA Coaches Conference in New Orleans.
That
which
much we can say.
You pinged me with a text, and I'm like, yes, I will be here. And I got to lock you down for a podcast because
I love it.
I would have loved for you to have been my first guest on this whole venture that is the Captains and Coaches podcast.
I love that, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, dude. And it was a conversation that we had 2 years ago, also at NSCA Coaches Conference. Or
Yeah.
maybe it was 3 years ago.
What was
I think
the
it was
location?
2001 or 21. San Antonio? It must have been
Somewhere around there.
3.
San Antonio. Could have been way back.
It-
We've been to a few of these together.
I know, but
Yeah.
recording a podcast. And
Yeah.
you,
Oh, that's right.
yeah,
That's right.
in another undisclosed location.
Correct.
And then you dropped a phrase, and this is the first time that I ever heard it, but social emotional learning.
That was
And
the
then
first time.
That
came
was the
across.
first
Oh, wow.
time, and that at least that it sunk in. Maybe viewing your presentations in the past and conversations, but when it the seed was planted, and then aiming to just listen to what you had to say with that, and then starting to have the light bulbs go off within my coaching of high schoolers, and then exploring it and really researching and understanding, and then seeing the growth and development with my year with Kid Strong and just the true representation of this. So much value, and you understand it better than anybody. So, speak to us briefly on your resume, your experience as a leader, and then where you came to this term of social emotional learning.
First of all, your thoughtfulness has always impressed me. And I mean that, and I'm glad we have a format to say that out loud. I mean that. So I'm glad that that concept resonated with you, and I'm impressed but not surprised by the work ethic that has followed, that you've really gone down that rabbit hole to figure it out. So thank you for that. My leadership resume. I've done a lot of things, Tex.
I know.
So I don't know where it started. I think in a cheesy way, I went from the chubby new kid in town to captain of my high school football team, and that was a really important developmental journey for me. I went on to pursue football for a while. I played professional football. I played in college, and I played arena football and indoor football, and then played over in Europe for a few seasons. And the obvious leadership opportunities that come from playing sport were apparent there. Professionally, it probably first started to manifest also on a football field. So sort of an organic transition from player to coach. Maybe more importantly, then found its way into the weight room, which we can discuss today. So for the last, this is hard to believe, I just got the E status, emeritus, from the NSCA. So I've been
I'm
in the
just
game for
distinguished, so
20 years.
20
I had to start right
years.
away to make it happen. It was my first gig. Anyway, so it found its way into the weight room. We grew a program at New Trier High School. Absolutely amazing place on the north side of Chicago. New Trier went from a very good place with very good people and dedicated coaches to all of a sudden we had a strength program, about 80 people strong. We now serve more than 2,000 visits a week. We're, if I'm not mistaken, the largest strength and conditioning program that exists, at least in terms of how many visits to our space. And the development of that was my first foray into leadership because, as you can imagine, with that many kids, it couldn't just be one person pulling the strings, micromanaging, running the show. We had to really develop a set of leaders to then go lead these groups that I could no longer have such direct touch points with.
Mm-hmm.
That was a big one. So professional development at New Trier became, that was like the first real big one. Once that sort of caught fire and started rolling, I was like, this is too good to save just for our space. So we started in my second round of grad school. We started a nonprofit organization called the Good Athlete Project, and it's been incredibly meaningful. And that has allowed us to take the work we've done at New Trier, in part, or a lot of the lessons we learned there, and spread them all around the world. So we've been down to Haiti a couple times, East Coast to West Coast, top to bottom of the country. We got back from Ireland not long ago. We're really trying to pick it up and share it as much as we can. So that was big. But then also, and I don't know, you said short, so I'll try. We just keep finding ways where, like, if it works, we must pass it on. We're sort of like, we're very ethically driven by that. Pay it forward is a very real concept. So we started the Illinois High School Powerlifting Association 10 years ago at this point. It's continues to be one of the faster growing sports within the state of Illinois. We have a bunch of teams, hundreds of kids, if not thousands at this point, powerlifting as a sport. And then more recently, it has transcended into the corporate realm. So I do a lot of one-on-one engagements, what people might call executive coaching, but I also do a lot of professional development sessions, and it is amazing, and you probably can already guess this, but the lessons learned through the development of team culture apply almost universally. Different phrasing, different dynamics, different metaphorical or actual trophies, but it's just people working together for a shared outcome. So it's been pretty cool.
That is an experience, and then you continue to learn, apply,
Yep.
and then which also leads to viewing gaps. So you're working with adults, you're working with high school athletes, but then this whole SEL thing, it was all the research is done at elementary school. So where does that journey, you seeing limitations, gaps, different behaviors that negatively affect teams, connect back to social emotional learning as it's connected to elementary school development for that age group?
And you're right. I think a lot of the research does happen pretty young, but it is transformative at every level. And I would even say it's had some of the biggest impact in spaces where we talked about this before hitting record. That education gap is real and resonant and is playing out in unfortunate ways, meaning distress, stress, anxiety, overwhelm, tough relationships. It just continue down that rabbit hole. Like, these things are presenting in adults almost, all over the place. And the thing that kind of tugs at my heartstrings is they don't know how to deal with it.
Nope.
And it is, man, I just had like a wave of emotion just thinking about it, because you find one of the worst things you can do, or one of the worst places you can find yourself in, is a stuck place where you start to see the issues, but you don't see the path forward necessarily. And that is this education gap, social emotional learning, healthy relationships, self-management is very real. And I think that's one of the reasons why this transition into more like executive coaching and adult stuff has really landed with folks. I was worried going into that space that I would miss some of the real fulfillment that comes from working with young people and helping them get to a next place. Empowering young people it's good, but it also gives the deliverer of that experience a lot of fulfillment. At least that's been my experience. And I was worried that moving to the other spaces wouldn't check that box in quite the same way, but it's been the opposite. the
Yeah.
gratitude from people in their 50s and 60s and who just missed this and are so grateful to now have it has been exceptional.
Yeah, and they're aware. So their walls have come down, their shields have come down, and I feel maybe it's because they reached failures or they had opportunities, relationships there they lost. But then something switched on for that self-awareness. So where I love SEL for working with teenagers, I view the high school coach, you're the last line of defense before this kid enters into the real world.
Without a
Professor,
doubt.
boss, where they're not going to put up with these excuses. So you as a coach, you have an opportunity to now, okay, well, we're going to teach self-awareness.
Yep.
We're going to help you understand purpose. With sports, purpose is very inherent, but now we can connect outside and tangible opportunities like the weight room to now your on-field play, where we just don't want to go through the motions in the weight room. We want to lift with intent, and that's going to translate to the field and the self-management. And this is what I love, especially with lacrosse. Penalties are costly. In football, 15 yards, whatever. But in lacrosse, we have to go man down. So now,
Right.
if I'm playing 6-on-6, we're even. But if I make a mistake as an individual, now it's 5-on-6, and I just put my team in a very, very poor position. So that way, it is an immediate, like, okay, here's a consequence. Where in football, it's, yeah, maybe I get barked at a little bit. I'm just giving you a hard time as a football guy.
I accept. As much as I love football, and I truly do, I haven't coached for about 5 years, and I mean, it's not sports specific, but all realms have room to grow, and football certainly is one of them, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, I'm with you 100%. I think, first of all, the purpose. Sometimes I wonder if we do a good enough job teaching for purpose in those environments. I think what we do a great job of is teaching compliance for a very specific and almost rigid path toward a goal, which can be helpful, but it can also be really tricky. One of the, we work with a lot of post-career athletes too. And there's this funny dilemma we're facing, which is the more invested you are in your sport, so the higher, and to reach the pinnacle, you've got to go all in. But the more invested you are, the steeper the cliff is on the other side. And part of the reason is you're so used to the rigor and clear directions of this environment, and all of a sudden it doesn't exist. So when you said self-management, that is a skill. Like compliance is far different than self-management. Early on, there's a great window of opportunity to show how complying with team rules and regulations, which are appropriate and needed, and I have them on every team I've ever coached, of course, but to explain the layers of it. Like, here's how the decision impacts the rest of us. Opening up someone's awareness to, does this decision that you're making, does it align with the goals that you have personally and that we have together? Instead of, you did this wrong, run a lap. You did that, which is different.
Yeah, and I want emotion for my athletes, so that way we can now articulate and label them specifically. So something that I aim to apply with them. This is from an author. His name is Bradshaw, but it's emotion, energy, and motion.
Yeah.
So now we get an opportunity. If you're angry, okay, well, I don't want you to use your stick as a weapon. I want you to turn that into an aggression and intent and urgency on the field. So redirect it. I'm thinking water boy, use it on the field.
For sure.
Grade, water sucks.
Yeah.
And helping them label this stuff, which we've practiced 5 days a week with some weight room time in there. So now we get the amazing chance to feel, to fail, and then learn this stuff before it comes to game time. And then as coaches, we got to model it.
And you got to model it. I love how you brought up labeling, because that's one area that I think is a sticking point for some people. Learning character development, social emotional learning, social emotional leadership. Can I say that?
Well, I was going to drop that bomb a little later, but hey, you got
Pause it. Edit. It's like you have to know what tools are at your disposal, right? And so the labeling, I've bumped into folks who are like, this feels like too much. And it might feel like too much. I'm not discounting that. But I do think it's a worthwhile endeavor to try to see what's going on, bring awareness to it, and then develop a language so you can start to unbraid and distinguish complicated situations, including the very complicated situation that's going on between our ears at any given moment. So to be able to label it, to bring awareness to it, be able to label it, that sort of, you essentially have to soften back or slow down to see it and label it if you then want to progress. And I think one of the things that I've run into, you mentioned anger. One of the things that I've run into is this idea that in arenas where everyone's so driven, which I like those spaces. I'm not pushing back on them, but in arenas where everyone is so driven toward an outcome and everyone's aiming for efficiency and speed, I think that's good with an asterisk, because if you don't create space to slow down, soften back, see it, name it, and then make a thoughtful step forward, you're just, it's like toil. Endless work is toil. Work with a purpose is different. But if you don't create space to see it well, name what's going on, I think that's ultimately what creates so much anger. And I have some stories, personal and otherwise, about that. Well, and I'll just share it. Why not? That's what we're doing here. I struggled with anger during the back end of my football career and transitioning into real life, for sure. And the intensity that I think was sometimes helpful in football when I was an athlete, I just did not have the tools at the time to name what was going on and navigate it well. So many emotions, if they go unnamed, bottle up and present eventually. It's
Yeah.
like, if you can't name the emotion you're having, like, start at frustration. Start with the fact that you feel like one of your teammates slighted you, or maybe your coach did, whatever it might be. If you don't see it, name it and ventilate the energy, which is happening. Absolutely. Right? Like, everyone knows what it feels like to be stressed out. Like, when you say, like, how does it feel to be stressed out? You can talk about the emotional sensation, but you could probably identify some muscle tension and different feelings in the body. If you don't ventilate that energy and you keep tamping it down, it will present eventually. And you have less control on the reins when it does, if so.
Time out. Every so often, I receive messages that remind me why we created the Old Bull program. Today, I want to share Kevin's story with you, not just because it showcases physical transformation, but because it represents what's possible when training evolves beyond just sets and reps. Kevin recently reached out with a message that captures the essence of what we're building. Here we go. Hey Tex, this is Kevin from Old Bull. Just wanted to shoot you a quick text to say I'm really digging the program and seeing great results. Made a few dietary tweaks, up my protein for one, but through the training I've been seeing more muscle and strength gain with infinitely less pain in the process than probably any other point in my lifting career. I recently got together with some friends I hadn't seen in a couple years, and every one of them made a comment about how they'd never seen me looking bigger or stronger than I do now. Appreciate the program and what you're doing to make it excellent. Here's what really matters. This isn't about quick fixes or unsustainable programs. Old Bull is engineered for the experienced lifter who values longevity as much as they do intensity. We're talking about intelligent progression that respects your body's signal while constantly pushing your boundaries. If you're ready to transform your training into something more sustainable, more intelligent, and ultimately more impactful, the Old Bull program is your path forward. Click the link in the show notes and take control of your strength journey today.
Yeah.
That happened to me a lot, unfortunately.
My big tackling, to use a football bond here, was just
Love
shame.
it.
So
Sure.
if I was getting a direction or an emotion from somebody else, internalizing it and then being silent, so that way, okay, well, I'm just gonna fight harder. I'm gonna be perfect. All this without communicating and being silent, and then eventually it just collapses all in itself.
You know, one of the trickiest, first of all, I'm sorry that you had that experience.
Well, that's why we're using the podcast.
So then that's why we're here,
cathartic.
dude, and that's why we're here. 100%. So I think one of the trickiest things to recognize about my athletics career, my football career specifically, which served me so well. I love it. I don't think I would change. I mean, it made me who I am. I'm very grateful. Lots of great relationships. Thankfully, I was in the presence primarily, mostly with great coaches. So I dealt a good hand in that way. One of the trickiest things that I recognized was there was a point in my life when I moved from the city of Chicago to the suburbs, played full padded football for the first time. And this was like, I wanted so badly to be part of this thing that was like a family tradition on both sides of my family. I want so badly to be part of it. And then I found it, and I didn't have immediate success, but I worked towards success. And there's some lessons to be learned in that. But the point of this story is one of the things I found in that space was really powerful mentorship and adults who were willing to put their arm around me and compliment me and give me some of the support that I think I was looking for at that time,
Mm-hmm.
which is great. Take one step forward, though, it was at its best when the team was doing well. And this is not to poke holes in any of the great coaching I was very lucky to have experienced, but if we would score a touchdown, these mentors now in my life, these powerful figures in my life, were thrilled. Hugs, high fives, the whole deal. If we don't pick up a first down, you walk to the sideline and you either get chewed out or potentially even worse, they don't even want to talk to you.
Yeah.
No eye contact. So all of a sudden you start to subconsciously develop this purely behaviorist version, like this place that was so powerful and meaningful seems like it might only be interested in what I can do for it or them or what have you. So you develop this faulty feedback loop.
Yeah.
That this value that I was just feeling is dependent on how I play. And then if I don't play well, the questions start to come back up. Guilt and shame are rampant in sports, whether people are willing to say that or not.
Yeah. My experience was zero positive,
Really?
only negative. So if you did well, then that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
That's
right.
the way it is. That's what you're supposed to do.
That's right.
There is no good job. There is no acknowledgement. There is no external earshot praise. There's no standing up for you. It was only negative. So then, guess that's where the shame comes in, because
Yeah,
now you
that
internalize
sucks.
and your perception of yourself is X, Y, Z, and that every option for yourself is worthless, is negative. Well, I am this.
I'm either perfect or I screwed up. Yeah.
Yeah. And then especially when it wasn't perfect.
Yeah.
Or it was perfect, but you are so confident and feel good. And guess what? The goalpost moved and you weren't told.
Right.
And now you are MF'd and you are taking it. Yeah. So that,
And how old were you when that happened?
I can 16 to 36.
Yeah. Most of your
Yeah.
conscious lifetime?
Yeah, conscious lifetime. I seem to find myself into these roles that are unappreciated, undervalued, defensive midi within the lacrosse field.
Yeah.
JV superstar, and then work environments. But hey,
Well, one thing that you've developed, and I know this might be in line with what we want to talk about too, is the concept of override.
okay,
So, right, if I open that one up.
yeah,
So override is one of the most common things I see in post-career athletes. And override essentially would be the ability, and I do think it's an ability, to just override whatever the inputs are and keep plugging forward. And if you are banged up in the fourth quarter of a football game and you have to pick up the first down anyway, that can be a real superpower. So there's a place for that.
mm-hmm.
I think what I see happen, and I experienced this myself, and it sounds like maybe you have as well to some degree, is you become good at taking lumps and you've got a lot of endurance and you can override if called upon. And then instead of it being selective override where you're choosing to tag in this superpower, it moves to a place what we call default override. So instead of it being something you decided to do because the game was on the line and you were going to put that purpose above your own pain, you start to tune out the inputs that are suggesting in any given environment that something might be off. Inputs of pain, inputs of discomfort, inputs of not feeling seen or valued. And like you can get past them. You can get past them, but we've just sort of built these default dispositions where we don't even slow down to see them for long enough to say, is this actually what I want?
No. So in an aim for helping build self-awareness for coaches,
Yep.
what are some ways that we can help them shift their focus beyond performance to prioritize character, community, boundaries, and establishing these lessons that they can then carry into their next endeavor, whether it's college athletics, trades, school, etc., relationships.
That's it. Yeah. There's a lot in that question for sure. I can go to some of the things that we do for sure. But I think there are a few easy, I think, mindset inputs when it comes to the language that we try to give to coaches. The first is the one that you've heard many times, which is the mantra of practical mindfulness. Is what we call it. It's, does your behavior match your goal? So I think a coach should be tasked with saying, this is the sort of person I would like to see as they step away from our program. I think they should be tasked to say that, in part because, I've sat in on interview committees. So many people will say upon interviewing, we're teaching life lessons, that I want this person to be a good father, a good member of the community, and all those things. And they probably mean it, but unless you get really specific, it doesn't have to, at least kind of specific on what sort of person that might look like. What's the profile of the person who can walk into the community, walk into college, trade, real life, and be set to go. If you're teaching something, we call them for now lessons or forever lessons. If it's not a forever lesson, then you're not teaching life lessons. And by the way, I'm not even suggesting that everyone has to. I think you could, because sports is maybe the most powerful learning environment on the planet. But I think it takes a thoughtful coach who actually does want the best for their players to be able to say, some of these things are for now lessons, and those are appropriate at certain times. But we have to have some forever lessons. Otherwise, we're not coaching for life lessons, and we can't keep pretending. So I think it would then move to creating that profile.
Mm-hmm.
Does your behavior match your goal is a mantra that just brings intention into mind. Like, what are my intentions here? Something I probably could have used more of as an early coach. Probably all early coach. That's why we're here. Again, we're paying it forward.
Mm-hmm.
So if you pick a few character traits or some things that would be backed by the research in social emotional learning, I don't know why you wouldn't pick things like growth mindset, which people, if you explain to people what growth mindset is, take it out of whatever preconception they may have of social emotional learning, which I admit sometimes can sound potentially soft. You say, I want a growth mindset. What does that mean? It means I want to be able to engage with challenges and believe in my ability to overcome them, to adapt, improvise, overcome the challenge that's ahead of me. Like, of course we want to instill that in people, you'd think. There's ways to do it. Grit is something that's been semi-controversial in the social emotional learning landscape. But grit, in its definition, is passion and perseverance for long-term goals. Like, who wouldn't want that? In fact, grit, just a side note, has proven to be a pretty good buffer for downstream mental health concerns. So if you're going to teach something that's good now and good later, something that can get us results in the fourth quarter of a game, or support someone for life, that's a pretty good one to onboard. You want some methods here, or what do you think?
Yeah, lay it on me.
And those are only two. We could go down the full laundry list. But if you think about what social emotional learning really is, self-awareness, self-management, grit, gratitude, growth, resilience, empathy. People balk at the idea of empathy. Well, like taking the perspective of another or trying to be into, anyway, these are all good things. They work in the moment and they work for life. I think so much of this is about getting clear on intentions. And once you are, and that's why there's no script for this, it's mostly conceptual. There's no script because the task for a coach is to bring it to life in their own environment. The way we do it is once we know what we want and we're clear as coaches about what we want, we find that there are opportunities for it all over the place, every day, with every group we work with. Probably the most intense example is, and most explicit, is when we work with powerlifters.
Mm-hmm.
A truly wonderful but blue-collar and meat-headed group. Great. It's great. It's like, let's just pick up as much weight as we can. Great. Let's make that a sport. So what we'll do, we'll be in front of a room, when we host a state championship for powerlifting, say, in Illinois, we'll have legitimately hundreds of kids representing 30 plus schools across the state. And we will make time at the end of every event. We'll stop the whole event. And literally I'm sure we've got film of it. If someone's on their phone in the back, we ask them to put it away. The message here is important. And we ask people to think, just reflect on what they've just done. So say we complete the squat event. So we're at the end of the squats and we'd say something like, go back to that moment. Think about how hard that was, a max effort squat. You're in the bottom of a squat. It couldn't be harder. It's a max effort. It's as heavy as you can possibly go. It's going to take all of you to even nudge that thing back in the other direction. And every one of you at least tried. You at least went for it. A lot of you were successful, but all of you at least went for it. In a moment where, like, as much as you could handle was on your back, you at least went for it. And we ask them not only to get into the moment, get back into the moment, we then ask them to name it. And truthfully, whether they call it grit or resilience or toughness or whatever it might be, they just have to put a label on it.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about that as like that's packing their suitcase. So you've been there, you've done it, you've felt it, you've named it. Now you have the opportunity to carry this forward with you.
Mm-hmm.
And then we ask them just for a second to picture where this might come into play. We got finals coming up. You might need a little bit of grit or resilience to get through that. So it's reflection, naming, and projection.
I love it.
And we are sort of priming the use of it in future events.
Yeah, I'll find a way to work that into the season. One thing that I've been very deliberate and intentional with is bringing up negative emotions as well. So where years, 15 years of coaching, I was so focused on positive, almost to the point ignoring the negative. And I felt that I wasn't effectively preparing them for the next level, whatever that was for my guys. So now it's naming and acknowledging team killers, like culture killers is what I call them. So envy, resentment, and
huge,
and helping these guys understand these things. A lot of it is natural human tendencies. So now it brings purpose to their own actions, and then we're leading by starting there. I feel we can get in a position to write goals that are specific. So we have then individual goals, and then when we come together, how do our individual goals help lead to a team goal that we then set? So I'm trying this season is reverse engineering, where I would start at the big goal, big top. Now I'm focusing on these human characteristics or tendencies. I don't know what to call them, but like envy, greed, resentment, stuff that will destroy a team if we're silent. And now being vocal about it, and then, hey, it's okay to feel that stuff, but now I'm going to go have that conversation. I'm going to go ask them these questions. If they've got a really nice car and I'm feeling jealous because 16-year-old who pulls up in some awesome Tahoe,
sure.
Well, I'm going to go ask them about that, or be grateful or gratitude, or find out what's wrong with it, because gas mileage on a lot of these cool cars sucks.
Yeah, that's right. That's
So
true.
now you're spending X amount a week, and I'm running around in a freaking, beater.
on a Huffy.
But guess what? Or
No
a
gas
Huffy.
on a bicycle.
No gas on a bicycle.
Yeah.
So finding and having and establishing that conversations versus, because there's a whole world on social media that they are living in. Like, we were in college in the dawn of all this stuff, so we grew up without it, but they don't know a life without it.
Isn't that crazy?
It is mind blowing.
And that happened in like the blink of an eye, because you and I are very young. Kind of.
Heart.
I'm just kidding. At heart. But it turned over very quickly. It's changed the entire thing. And we talk about like education gaps. That's a huge one. So things are evolving. So even more credit to that idea that to adapt and overcome, these things that would really call upon a growth mindset become increasingly important. What you just brought up is really powerful. And I wonder if could you imagine a situation where all you did was focus not on dangling a trophy I'm not against trophies, again, by the way, but if you said, what if one of our goals was to make this team one where communication was clear and there wasn't resentment and there wasn't trash talk between people or envy? Like, what if we could just make it that? Do you think that would lead to better outcomes on the field? And I think there's some hard-nosed folks who would say, it doesn't have any impact. Well, I would disagree. I would say if you can have great team communication and a feeling of trust across your team, that whatever goal you have is definitely more attainable in that state than the other. So I love that idea of resentment's a huge one, man.
Mm-hmm.
You ever felt it?
All the time.
Only all the time. Only every
Only
day.
all the time, and then just through as a collegiate athlete, we didn't have a home field. We had to drive vans to different high schools to play our home games. So then we would then travel to these beautiful
Yeah.
fields, Gettysburg, Lynchburg, Salisbury. I was just talking to Matt
Sure,
Nye, their strength
right.
coach, and like it was so cool. It was so cool. My favorite place to play is Lynchburg College because they have their field that's surrounded by dorms. And we had people in the windows
Hanging out
hooting and
oh,
hollering.
wow.
They would there was also a track around the field, and frats would take couches, put them on the field. They were this close to the field, and the school allowed them. And it's like, dude, I'm getting heckled. I am having so
Right.
much
But
fun.
it's a blast, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So, and then we would go back to our school. However, now reframing and realizing all the constraints that our team had, that made me so much of a better coach because I didn't have access to a weight room. I didn't have access to all these things. So I need to get creative and then have different thought processes. Okay, this is what I want to do. I'm going to lead off with purpose. And now what's the practicality? Okay, well, we only have half the field because the women have the same practice time. And then our field is in full field to begin with. So now, okay, here's what we want to do, and then the key there is prudent. Did we accomplish the purpose? Yep. If not, okay, let's make adjustments and revisit. But there's so many things that factor in: communication, time frame, the kids themselves. So
Without a doubt.
constraints help build resiliency and grit for me as a coach to say, hey, drop me anywhere in the world, and we're going to make some
And I'm
people
going to figure
better.
this out. Right. That's exactly right. So, and I can't help but bring up the idea when you say that there's this idea that there's no such thing as road rage. And maybe this is not even a phenomenon in Texas. Have you ever been in traffic down there?
Well, have I? Yeah, I'm from Houston. You don't
Okay.
honk. You assume they have a gun.
Oh, fair enough. Well, there's one control on road rage. And what it means, it's like provocative. I think a lot of people can resonate with that if you've been sitting in traffic for hours and it's just a pain in the butt. But like,
I took it very literal.
there's there's a literal story to go with it. So the idea that there's no such thing as road rage is that there's a road and there is rage, but there was probably rage there before you got stuck in traffic. And it's like, in a pretty easy example of it is like, well, there's 1,000 cars in this traffic jam. It's not 1,000 people cussing, flicking people off and laying on the horn. But if you're doing that, that is not to suggest that your environment or your situation is not a challenge, but there's certainly something underneath that is provoking that response. So I think that's an important lesson too, because especially in I worry about like the NIL culture in college football. We don't have to go down that rabbit hole at the moment unless you want to.
We got a lot to cover here.
Okay, yeah.
And I've talked about that with a lot of
We won't talk
coaches
about
at
it.
the college level.
Won't
Ryan
talk about
Davis is doing a great job at Maryland.
I think the reason I brought that up though is because like I went down this rabbit hole playing a small school too, or went down that slippery slope rather, the comparison slope. It's like I used to get so frustrated with folks who were like, you wonder what matters, and especially when it comes to collegiate athletics. Like, well, that team, I'm taking your experience now, that team has such great support. And their facilities are fantastic. Well, why don't we have that? And you can, there's so many things that could build up there, but that you can extend that to untouchable reaches. Like I used to talk about Knox College, one of the greatest liberal arts institutions on the planet, Knox College. We play in the Midwest Conference. Well, the Midwest Conference isn't the same as the MAC, and the MAC's not the same as what used to be the Pac-12. Pac-12 is probably not on par with the Big Ten. That's my own opinion. But the Big Ten, and there's always another thing to compare yourself to if you get stuck in that thing. And I actually just watched something recently with Texas. Okay, so the Big Ten is better than the SEC right now. No offense, but SEC
None
is
take it. I'm a
SEC
D3 All-Star.
There you go. SEC's cream of the crop, and there are years where Texas will get blanked in the draft. So like I'm not as good as that person or as that. So it's silly to try to walk that line but people find themselves doing it all the time. Easier said than done. Sorry. The script. I don't want to go off script too much.
That's okay. The I guess in line with this to help bring it back, because you can get stuck in those cycles. You can
Yep.
get those patterns.
Yep.
They
Oh,
are
yeah.
sticky and they're traps, and it's very difficult to see the light at the end of the tunnel sometimes. And I feel that with the purpose, you can do that. So I've always had a purpose and a big picture and a big vision, but then there's also times where, okay, I need goals here. I need small steps. I need objectives to help crawl out of this hole and get back on the path of my purpose. So how do you, when working with your high schoolers, articulate the difference between purpose and goals so they can start to really come up with this themselves? Sometimes if the team's got purpose, team's got goals, but how do you encourage that from an individual level?
I think you got to get the group involved for one. I think one thing that we could all do a better job of is listening to people. That's probably a very broad
What'd you
brush,
say?
but that's right. Sorry, I was on Snapchat. My bad. No, just listening to people in general, and I think getting the team involved in the articulation of goals and standards and things like that is always helpful. I think you've heard me say this before, but there's a difference from a coaching perspective. We'd ask people to reflect on this idea. Are you a motivation or are you an imposition? And an imposition means you are imposing your own goals and values and standards onto a group.
Mm-hmm.
To be a motivator, you have to align with the motives of the group. Now, I think, especially depending on the age range, there's only, you do have to be the director. You do have to say, that's a good idea, but I think we should do this instead. So you have to be the coordinator of this, but it is always good to make your thinking visible so that people have ownership in it. And that's huge. So we start every season with team workshops, and I'm trying to think of an exception to that, but I don't think there is, at least now. We do team workshops. So we help people. We know what we want as coaches coming in. And we say, these are some of the standards that are absolutes. But maybe you have 7 spaces on the board, creating team values. We bring 5 standards to the table, and we're going to co-create the last 2. These are non-negotiable. These we want everyone to be a part of. Mm-hmm. So they start to build a narrative around it. And I think that's especially powerful because what you're really doing is you're priming self-talk for future use. So if you want people to be able to call upon purpose, like, why are we doing this? You got to get up early, you got to take a long road trip, whatever it might be. For them to be able to articulate the purpose in those moments of discomfort is easier if they've had a hand in the naming of the purpose. Mm-hmm. So I think it can be very powerful.
That almost answers my next question of why is it so important for kids to understand why behind behaviors, both good and bad. So now if my behavior is connected to a purpose, now I get the opportunity as a coach to help lead.
Yep.
And one of my first college coach, I had 2 college coaches, he used to say when some kid in Evan did something stupid off campus, he'd come in on practice on Monday and say, or film or whenever, all right, we're going to play a little game. Good idea, bad idea. And then he would present blindly, not name names.
Sure.
We would all get punished and run for it, but he would present the problem and all of us were like, bad idea.
Bad idea. Right.
Run.
That's right. Well, I think that does a great job of, and this is a strategy I use with a lot of different groups and people, is helping them see the gap. Is massive for whether it's you're trying to regulate behavior, work toward a shared outcome, or just help someone be a better version of themselves. Is you just help them see the gap. Mm-hmm. Maybe they don't need a kick in the butt. Maybe they need support and, hey man, you said that you wanted to do this sort of thing.
Yeah.
You did this instead. Can you help me understand the difference, the space between what you intended to do and what you actually did?
This was a valuable learning, and SEL has really helped me understand that before I would take those kids and I would label them because their decision would inevitably come to the field, whether I was a college coach or a high school coach. It always came to coach in the desk. So now I would label them as bad kid or this. But all those behaviors, those kids are trying to push for boundaries. They're trying to uh, fight for discipline. So a lot of these actions and behaviors where they come back with, I don't know, and then the head down, and then, okay, well, we're going to have to punish the team, or we're going to have to punish you. And it was just, all right, well, I didn't start to think about why
Mm.
or put them in a position to answer why. It was just
Yeah.
like, what the hell are you doing?
Yep. Yeah, that's big. Why is a big one. So this makes me, I wish we had a whiteboard here. I would draw some stuff for you. I have that instinct in me big time. But so we have this thing called the care model. Have I shared that with you before? At
With
some
our
point?
listeners.
Well, I'll share it with the listeners. So it's visual. So I'll do my best to
I can
explain it.
B-roll this on
Okay.
YouTube.
Okay. Fair
If you
enough.
point here, it will
All right.
appear.
So right about here, as the care
Make it
model.
easy on me.
There you go, right there. So the care model it is a way of seeing the organic nature of human behavior. It's not a framework, it's not a template. It is a really powerful insight into why people behave the way they behave. So it's not a pyramid, it's not linear, it's an organic structure, as you can clearly see right here. At the center of that structure is the self, just you. And the first recognition that we touch on as we explain the care model is that you are valuable, full stop. You don't have to do anything to prove it. If you're not good at lacrosse, if you never win a championship, if you don't make the next sale in your company or whatever, nothing can violate that truth. So and that can be one of the most uncomfortable pieces of the whole discussion for people is that you matter and you don't have to win a freaking championship to prove that. So that's big. That's number one. That's at the very core of the model. Just beyond it, sit mindsets and drives.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll do drives first. Drives are maybe obvious, but it's everything physiological. It's nervous system level. It's thirst. It is if I step on a tack, I immediately recoil, and there's not a lot of processing that happens there. So it accounts for a lot of those things. Mindsets is maybe the interesting piece from a coaching perspective, because what you start to find is that the way one thinks about the self exists at the mindset level, not at the self level. So self-esteem, self-awareness, self-concept. Like you might have a poor self-concept. You might not think you're valuable. You're mistaken.
Yeah.
But that came from somewhere though. That was built. I have a baby now. Thrilled about it.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. She's the absolute best. I don't think she has a lot of self-doubt. And and I really hope I hope she can remember that truth for her entire life, because people forget about it and they find counter evidence and they're taught. Anyway, going off script, mindsets and drives. The way we think about the self is not a true indicator of the self. Just beyond that, skills and strategies. So the skills and strategies that we develop over time are in alignment with our mindsets and drives. If it's something as basic as thirst, like you develop skills and strategies that allow you to quench your thirst. This is actual, not just for dramatic.
Storyteller.
There it is. And then beyond that, the outermost layer of this organic structure that is the care model is behavior. And what you start to realize is a couple things become obvious pretty clear. One of them is that our behaviors are more an emergent property of the human organism than we sometimes want to recognize. Like sometimes we don't have as much agency in them as we might think. So that's one piece. The other piece is that there is a very faulty connection between the behavior level and the self level. And that oftentimes I'll meet with someone who wants to talk about improving performance in one way or other. Maybe they want to get better at procrastination or say less when in their public speaking. They have a behavior that they want to change. And what you find very quickly is that they have, unfortunately, related behavior to self, and that creates the sort of shame that is actually the primary hurdle that they have to get over. So step one is to break that connection. and then start to investigate how this amazingly complex human came to be. And there's and the two side pieces that you can see here. One of them is physical state. So you behave in a different way. If you're on 3 hours of sleep, your skills and strategies might be dulled, your mindset might be slightly shifted, and your behaviors will change similarly. The other piece is history. And the best way to understand, or an easy way to understand how history impacts behavior is if a dog ran up here to us and say one of us went to pet it and one of us hightailed it out of here. If you ran, that might seem like a strange behavior to me. But if I cared enough to understand that at some point in your life, in some point in your history, you'd been bit by a dog, that imprinted on your mindset and drive, develop skills and strategies in accordance to that, and you are behaving in a way that makes complete sense given your own unique history. So that has, for me and for I think many others, created a lot of patience. And a lot of understanding. Now, there are certain behaviors that emerge that you don't want to condone. So it's not to say, like, to understand is not to condone. So you might say, hey, Tex keeps yelling at me. I get that it comes from somewhere. And if I care enough about you, we might continue a conversation until we get to a place of shared understanding. But I don't have to accept it. But to understand it is always the best first move. So.
And then as a leader, you can help shape it, especially if it's a negative behavior. So now if I have a colleague or a coworker, I'm not just labeling and then
Exactly.
writing that off. It's helped me understand. And then, hey, how about this?
Exactly. It's less that kid's bad than it is that kid made a decision that didn't align with our standards. And since he's under our charge, we might want to take a little time and figure out why. So important, really important, and hard to do, but that's the freaking work that we're trying to do here.
Exactly. So it's not only leading individuals, it's also helping and shaping coaches.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've been a part of many different programs, many different specific, right, weight room card programs, many different philosophies through leadership. So it's awesome to, reflect on all of those different, and then every time I learn something new and cool, think back to when that appeared or where I could have made a specific decision differently and how that could have impacted, right, the game, the season, or even that session.
Yeah, that's right. Man, yeah, and in the best of worlds, I think this would be a nod to any coach who's trying to do thoughtful, meaningful work that will actually help people. I mean this, is the kids probably know what behavior they should have selected more often than not.
Good idea, bad idea.
That's right. Good. Exactly. It's probably clear to them. And they probably are aware of skills and strategies that would have gotten them to a different place. So the question is, it always has to start with why did they not make that decision? And what you find very routinely is that you have to keep going layers and layers down. Ultimately, you want to get to the place where there's a judgment-free self-assessment of, I made this decision, I put it out into the world, I got feedback, it didn't work. I'm going to adjust the behavior, and if I can't adjust it enough, I'm going to develop a new skill or strategy, and we move forward.
So how can we help athletes distinguish the difference between behaviors and habits?
Well, that's a great question. So similar to like the default override concept, a habit's just a behavior that has become habituated. You've just I like to use the metaphor of a forest when talking about the brain.
Okay.
So if you imagine the brain is the most complicated forest that you've ever walked through. You're constantly, you're carving paths through it all the time. And the more you walk a specific path, it's like a deer path that's been walked countless times from the den to the water or whatever that is. The path becomes clear. It doesn't mean it's the right path. But it does mean it's been habituated. So if you ever get to a place where you're walking the same path over and over, not getting the outcomes you want, always starts with awareness. And then you essentially have to make a decision in alignment with your purpose, goals, what have you. That is like, hey, this isn't getting me what I want. At some point, I'm going to need to take a right turn through the trees. And that's going to be a challenge. I'm going to have to get off the easy path, which has become habituated, and start opting into selecting, bushwhacking a new path towards something that aligns more with what I want. So it's not easy, especially once it's become habituated, but that's the awareness it takes.
I love it. So now, how do we help kids identify negative environments or maybe individuals they're hanging out with that are not helping them make the correct decisions and behaviors?
That's a great question. I think one of the things that a friend of mine, Levante, shared with me once, and he's freely shared this story, so I'm not speaking out of school here, but it's the third person idea, not third person like self-talk, but third person in a car of 5. This is a hypothetical. Have you heard this idea?
No, I'm all in. Let's
So
go.
if there are 5 people in a car and you're just out on a Saturday night and you think that, and you start to sense that there's some bad ideas floating around, more often than not, it's not all 5 people are aimed at whatever it might be, knocking over a liquor store or something, hopefully less, whatever it might be.
Whatever. Yeah.
The task so often is not to convince everyone around you. It's just to be able to identify that what's about to happen is not in alignment with what you want, to have the awareness for that. And then to be able to have enough confidence to speak up. And part of the piece of that confidence is the recognition that you don't have to convince all 5. It's probably 50-50 already. You just have to be the third person. Now we're at a majority. And the amount of times that seems to be playing out, like when we ask folks about decision making, who you surround yourself, the power of a group, you don't have to turn 100% of the group. You just have to get a majority. So to be the third person, speak up for those who are probably also having a similar dialogue going on between their ears, that's the task. And that feels, I think, like a smaller and more manageable task than completely course correcting, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Push me on this though, because I want to get it as actionable as we possibly can.
And I'm just thinking practically, how can I create a scenario
Like in a weight
that
room?
in practice that can help translate to the social environment? Because more often than not, sports are, hey, coaches are leading the way.
Yeah.
So now, how can I create that? Do I intentionally present a wrong path as a coach in a timeout?
Ooh,
And then
that'd
now
be
I'm
tricky
testing my leadership development, waiting for somebody to
to
say,
call you on it.
yeah,
I would say from a coach's perspective, no, because if there are 5 people in the car, one of them is the coach, that coach is worth 5 votes.
right.
Like there's more power in that vote. So that would be a tricky one, but I see where you're going.
I'm just trying to
a great
create a
idea.
scenario where I can test,
Yeah.
stress test our character, leadership, confidence development.
I'm gonna have to come up with one.
Yeah,
And I'll
we'll punt that out to
we'll
the
punt it, and I'll write on it
captain's and coach's
potentially.
notion here.
Can we do that?
Yeah.
Because I think to make that concept very actionable is key. But I would also say this, and I'm failing to come up with an example, but I think this might be an opportunity to talk about the idea that in the development of character and social emotional learning, you also don't want to over manufacture it. And that's sometimes where I see it becoming a challenge for people, is when they try to have a really specific script for what we want this to look like. Oftentimes, referring back to the care model, a meaningful mindset imprint, whether it's through storytelling, your own modeling or exampling, can have a ripple effect on behavior that would not have existed without that imprint. So I'll have to think about it a little more, but I would maybe it's an opportunity to shine a light on how important coaching is. Because like you've heard of priming before. You're priming downstream decisions all the time. Modeling, language, the environment you create in the room, all of those things.
Yeah, that's what I feel my primary purpose is at the high school level, is to help lead them to confident, responsible decision making.
Love that.
So this is as connected to selecting the right weight, right? Not putting the extra 10 pounds on, put the
Right.
extra 5 pounds on.
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to let you fail a lot in the weight room because it's a controlled environment
Right.
and safe. And then within the field, it's often respecting authority. Just
Sure.
there's an interesting wave within the high school not lax lacrosse, the
Yeah.
laxity within the
Yeah.
classroom
Right.
of different than I would expect a boss employee relationship.
Mm.
So try different authoritative
That's really.
actions.
I guess I can use that to talk about a drill that we do, like from the ref thing.
Oh,
That I
goodness
mean,
gracious.
isn't that a problem? So
It is in the fall. By
yeah,
springtime, no, we've stamped
it's
that out.
fixed.
So the
Good for you,
freshmen
man.
or transfers that come in,
Yeah, we don't have that anymore.
no.
I love that. That's incredible. And then I wonder if you could peel from that, identify what within that is social emotional learning. Like, is there an
Ah,
empathy? Is there a respect? Like, one of the reasons that we don't do that to referees is because it is disrespectful. It's ultimately going to hurt our team. I've never seen a single person argue their way or berate a ref to the point where they overturned a call. So it's just silly in all those ways. But what about some empathy?
oh
Like,
yeah.
isn't that a great opportunity to teach empathy? This person is here because they love the sport. They're trying to create a good environment for you guys. Do you really want to jump that guy who probably sat in an hour of traffic to come be here with you? So that might be an interesting intro to empathy. And also, so one of the things that we do to make this tangible for training environment is we'll do finishers, competitive finishers after a day in the weight room. And usually it's relay based and we keep score. But we don't give tally marks. You know, we'll have a whiteboard, team A, team B. You get a point for winning, but the expectations are very clear and they look like this. And anyone I've trained will probably be able to recite them maybe, but if your team wins one of the relays, you have to cheer. I don't care if you're faking it. Cheer your freaking lungs out, right? You're just waiting there in line. Your teammate is running, is going as hard as they can. You got to cheer when they win. If you don't cheer when they win, a point comes off the board. If you argue a finish with any of the coaches in the room, a point comes off the board. If you use the kind of language that we said we don't allow here, a point comes off the board. So that's one sort of tangible, explicit way to start to work those in.
I love it. I can certainly work that in. You mentioned language. If a kid coaches, because
Yeah.
that in at least the environment that I'm game time, if they hear cursing, and then it just becomes obscene.
Yeah.
Flags are coming out. So now to nip that in the bud, personally, it makes me cringe just so much just hearing kids say certain things.
Yeah.
So then it's okay, 10 push-ups. You're either going to get freaking jacked or we're going to curb this behavior.
That's right.
And then what I want to do also is add a force multiplier in. Fall, again, spring sport with lacrosse. Fall, we get the opportunity to introduce these small, and I keep them fun and cheeky, punishments,
Sure.
using air quotes for our listeners.
Right.
So 10 push-ups for dropping that. But now in the spring, since we're closer to season and being serious, and then the mission of winning state, now, okay, well, it becomes a multiplier. So
Yep.
10, 20, 40,
It's great.
80, and like I don't want to risk rhabdo and ended up in some headline as a
No,
strength coach.
that's right.
Some kid
That's right.
did 400 push-ups at practice,
Right.
but he's got some behavior that we're aiming to shape here.
That's right. That's right. And if
That's gonna
someone gets
cost the
to
team.
400 push-ups, maybe there's another conversation that has to happen. But
Yeah,
I do
will
like
step
the idea,
in
though. That's right.
at that point
Before it
and,
gets to 400.
Yeah, we're gonna dead bug him to death.
There you go.
Yeah, there's no rhabdo coming from 18 minutes
No.
of dead bugs.
No, never in the history. Yeah, that's right. I love that. And I like the way that you kind of ramp it up because, you know, when you think about problem solving, especially when it comes to human dynamics, a lot of acronyms and catchphrases here, but UMAS is something that we refer to: understanding, motivation, access, and then skills.
Understanding, motivation, access,
skills.
skills.
And I think too often people focus on skill development.
Yes.
It's appropriate, but but it's limited. So like if someone doesn't understand, then there's no amount of additional skill that you could onboard that would change that. And what I like about the fact that you ramp it up over time is by 3 months into the off season, they probably get it. They probably understand. So something else is off kilter, and it can be managed differently. But yeah, that's a good acronym to take for people. And the understanding piece is a lot of what we've talked about today, to
Mm-hmm.
be honest. It's like we have to work toward understanding. It is an effort. We don't have the luxury of just being on our default settings as coaches, angry, ticked off all the time. Like you can get angry. I'm not like anger is an emotion too. Feel it and then investigate it and ask why it keeps coming up and is aimed at 15-year-olds.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That does take time, and
It does.
it takes mistakes.
Yes.
Yeah, because I've yelled at kids when
So
they didn't need deserve. It was
no.
yeah, and that's why using Remember the Titans as a reference, where he calls the field his sanctuary, like taking time when I get out of my car and step onto the field,
That's good.
put the world behind me.
That's right.
Here's my focus, and then the fortunate, beautiful hill country that I live in. I'm either at a 6:30 a.m. practice where I get to see the sun rise, or I'm at a 5 p.m. where I get to see the sun set. So I'm just in a very fortunate space to have
Yeah.
this truly as a sanctuary for the field.
And yeah. And your environment definitely does contribute. And I think one of the things that we have to navigate a lot is the idea that your environment is not an absolute determining factor. So you can see as many beautiful sunrises as you want, but if you're struggling with something else, it won't have the same impact. Like there are paths toward appreciation of the sunset or sunrise, but it's not automatic.
Mm-hmm.
Automatic. So
And that's a lot of off the field to
gotta
put
do it.
myself in a position to then appreciate that and not let the kids not create coaching scars for these kids
Right.
because I'm not taking care of
Coaching
business
scars,
off
that's
the
an
field.
interesting term.
That Harrison Bernstein, Soldiers of Sidelines, I use it
That's
a lot.
great.
In his book is called Everyday Coach.
Love it. You know, if a coach is not working on him or herself, you got to start there. You
Mhm.
have to, and that will give you. It's like I'm trying to think of a metaphor. I mean, to have played gives you a deeper understanding of the game you're going to coach. If you're aiming for social emotional learning, emotion regulation, whatever it is, responsible decision making, to practice it and model it is not just for the priming effect that it does for kids, but you got to work on you.
What?
That's really important.
Yeah, and I've experienced the dark days, the isolation, the loneliness, what I don't want them to experience. So now it's getting ahead of
Yeah.
the envy, the resentment, the anger, and
Yeah.
all of these negative traits. And that's why I wanted to try this approach of leading with that stuff.
So good.
So that way they understand if you do continue, maybe if you choose to ignore the lesson that is put forth in front of you, you're going to have to deal with it down the road
Yeah.
when this dragon becomes bigger and more difficult to slay. You can call me wrong. However, like in this scenario, I've been down where you don't want to go. And trust me, let's squash this little bug while we got it.
So good, man. They're lucky to have you.
I want them to think that 20 years from now. Now,
Yeah. You want to get an act? Yeah. They might.
now
Who
it's
knows
a lot of coachisms.
A lot
And
of
then,
yeah.
But here's the beauty, and this is what I did enjoy. I had two dudes go D1 in lacrosse from our small town, and then they came back for Christmas break. Weight room's open, garage is open. So then utilize them to film some new exercise demos for online training program. Mobile, check it out.
Can't
And
miss it.
then just how funny and just sticky coach's voice is
Yeah.
here 1-2 years later where they're in their career,
Mm-hmm.
which is hilarious, and how like, hey man, we hated that, but then they're not having back issues. Every single one of their teammates has back issues. Well, the amount of side pillars and
Yeah.
dead bugs we did,
Right.
you hated me then,
Right.
but you don't realize what back pain feels like and how hindrance it is. You hear your athletes, your teammates complain about it, and you don't have to experience that because you
Yep.
did the work way back when I asked you to.
It's really good. I think that applies for body and mind, obviously. I think it's interesting because it's this piece, I think, that a coach would have to make with the idea that you might not see return on this sort of investment immediately, but it will be there for them. Like you're making these mindset deposits that will appear down the road, and some of them will recognize it and come back and thank you and stop by over winter break or write you a nice letter out of nowhere. And that's meaningful. And I think what I share with some of our coaches on our staff is for every one compliment you get, there's probably 100 other people out there that, just didn't slow down to write the letter or whatever it might be, but your impact is lasting for sure.
Yeah, and I hope they do get those deposits because
Yeah.
sometimes the people that aren't satisfied with the experience, or the parents or somebody steps in that is very loud,
That's right.
and that negative does outweigh
Yeah, for sure.
the positive. However, if you do step back and reflect on your work and feel good about what you said, how you applied it, then you stop listening to that external noise.
Right.
And you don't see that or look for that validation. You know you did a good job, and then the fruit, it pops up, like
It
it
will.
becomes the reward when you see these guys go off and do awesome stuff, whether that's on or off the field.
Absolutely.
Well, I feel the our time is getting limited here,
So,
we're
Tell
gonna
me.
we're
Tell
gonna
me more about your feelings.
we're gonna finish strong.
Love
So
it.
now you write a lot, and I love to proactively read your stuff, ponder on it, and then see where I can fit this stuff in. So
I appreciate that.
you've got a website, you've got resources.
Yep.
Where can people go to find, read, and learn more about the work that you're doing?
I think there are two main channels. One of them is there's articles up at goodathleteproject.com, and there's also a link to one of our pages, beyondstrength.net, which has a lot of lessons and testimonials and stories about coaches who are deciding to go beyond strength and talk about things that last for a lifetime. The other is bedrockedu.com. Bedrock education. We use the term bedrock because it's foundational leadership development. So there's an articles page up there as well. That's probably where that comes into play the most. Either one of our Instagram accounts, we have little snippets of presentations I've done and workshops that I've run and things like that. So those would be good starting places.
And keynote presentations.
Dude, I feel so lucky. Yeah. So over the last leaning into this sort of work has been so meaningful, and the most meaningful and exciting part of it all is how well received it seems to be. I don't know that this stuff would have landed 20 years ago. I don't know that there would have been an audience for it. So we're trying to kind of carve a niche, and I say we because it is a group that's bringing this stuff to life, but I have been invited to do keynote addresses, speak at big conferences. I did a commencement address last year. I'm very, and I'm feeling it right now. I'm just incredibly grateful that what we're trying to share has an audience, and that audience seems to be increasingly receptive. And you can tell even at a conference like this. We walked up to a conversation today. You mentioned Matt, like a bunch of good people having discussions that would not have happened at a strength conference, a football conference, or anything like that back when. The tide is shifting.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, even to the coaches who are hesitant to use this stuff, not to avoid the conversation of your own emotional well-being, social emotional learning, character development in explicit ways. To avoid that would be like saying, I'm not going to watch film when everyone around you has started to do film breakdown, or I'm not going to do strength and conditioning. I think you will be left behind, and I think that's a good thing. So I believe that anyone listening to your podcast is already kind of on board, but feel free to take that message to those who might not be so sure.
Yeah, and double down, put a stamp on it.
Yeah,
'Cause
absolutely.
If you maybe are thinking or feeling this like the third person in the car, and you
Yep.
don't say anything,
That's right.
and the team you're on, the staff you're around, they just want to be the MFers, the go hards, and just start running even themselves into the ground, eventually you know,
Yep.
you have that feeling inside. It's going to happen. I've seen too many good coaches leave this career
Yep.
because of one reason or another, when all they had to do was start asking the right questions
Mm.
and then believing in themselves to vocalize that. So
Yeah.
and I mean that's one of the major missions here.
Yep.
And then it led off with one of your phrases where sports don't teach lessons, coaches do.
Yep.
And then whether it's, the old dad in Texas, and I still run into this, where it's football taught me this, so they force this sport
Yep.
onto their kid.
Sure.
When that dad may be fortunate he had a great leader as a coach. And there are a lot of sports that aren't being led by great individuals right now. And that's what I feel lacrosse, and that's why I'm so passionate about.
Yeah.
It is a lot of giving my time to the sport, because the only thing holding lacrosse back is great coaches. These dudes, they have successful careers, and they go on to very high-paying jobs that just pull them away from the sport.
Yep.
So I will.
Yep. And you know this already, but there are a lot of amazing coaches out there as well. But yeah, we need to keep this tide going in the right direction. There's another phrase I'll throw out there: meet frustration with curiosity. And maybe that's a great way. That's a tagline that I think can be helpful as a mindset deposit. Meet frustration with curiosity. If you're stuck in a traffic jam, or you're upset that the kid ran left when he was supposed to run right, and you feel it coming up, to get curious instead of just popping off will, as long as you're doing it in an authentic way, will absolutely lead to better outcomes. Performance-wise too. And here's another nod. I don't mean to stretch this too long, but it's a pat on the back for myself and the people we've worked with. But like, we've worked with more than 60 state and national championship teams. We don't just work with high schoolers. We've worked with professionals and Olympians. Like, this is not the enemy of high performance. It's absolutely they're part of the same conversation. If you talk to someone like in sports psychology about having someone go perform at a high level, maybe it's a pitcher walking out to the mound feeling anxious. The strategies that you can enlist, it's all about overcoming certain hurdles so that your talent can shine.
Mm-hmm.
This is that work. So a team that communicates well, people who are self-aware, able to navigate relationships and cultures well, that is going to get you to a higher level on the field, and then importantly, off it.
Fake mic drop. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Captains and Coaches Podcast.
Thanks for having me,
Jim
man.
Davis at Good Athlete Project, and many more handles.
Many more handles.
You got to lock that in. Give him an opportunity to aim and focus. And he drops some websites. Bookmark it. Always new
Appreciate
content that is very enlightening and empowering, thought-provoking, and it helps build amazing leaders.
Well, I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for you, and I'm grateful to anyone listening. Reach out.
Boom. All right. Bye.
Bye.
Scene. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Captains and Coaches Podcast. If you like what you heard here today, be sure to like, subscribe, rate, and review to the show. Be sure to follow Jim at Good Athlete Project and subscribe to the Beyond Strength Journal. I have an article about how I integrate social emotional learning into my lacrosse practices and captain leader development with my team. Check that out in volume number 2. If you're looking for a strength and conditioning program to follow for yourself or to lead your team, head to captainsandcoaches.com. Thank you again for listening and helping us raise the game.